welcome to this third webinar dedicated to the Synodal process. So it's the last one of this very interesting series, and we are the honor to be to have with us on board Dr. Gilles Routhier from the Laval University in Quebec, in Canada. So he'll give us the pleasure to share his vision and also his analysis of the Synodal process. And we are very happy to have this moment of interaction and reflection today. So welcome on board. Maybe it's morning time for you or afternoon. Some of you also evening time. So thank you to be here. And I'm pleased now to give the floor to Dr. Gilles Routhier for this third and last episode of the series of webinar.
Good afternoon, good night, or good morning, depending on where you are. So I'm pleased to give this third webinar on the Synodal process. For those who were with us for the last one, so the first one was dedicated to the Synodal process itself as a learning process, a spiritual learning process. The second one was, the focus was on the result of the first stage, the diocesan stage. And this one, and it is very appropriate for two reasons. It is on the continental stage. I said for two reasons, because first, when we think about the governance of the Catholic Church, most of the time, maybe it is not the case for you, and particularly if you are a theologian, but most of the time we think about the local or diocesan level, saying that the church, the Catholic Church, is governed by the bishop of the diocese, and the other person we think about is the Pope. So we think about the universal and the local. And sometimes we see the tension between the two. And there is opposition between local and universal, as if there is nothing in between. So this time we will, and it is important to talk about that, because we don't have we are not accustomed to think about continental level. And the second reason why it is so important, it is a new thing. Continental level, what is it about? And why is it so important, this novelty? So in the church tradition, as I said, we have this experience, and we know about local or diocesan church. And we have various councils, diocesan synod, to live the synodality. In between, in the past, but we don't have this experience, because so we have provincial councils and plenary councils. But what we observe, even if the Second Vatican Council in the decree Christus Dominus number 36, even if the council promote the provincial and plenary council, for instance, I quote, "This sacred ecumenical synod earnestly desires that the venerable institution of synods and council flourish with fresh vigor. In such a way, faith will be deepened and discipline preserved more fittingly," and so. But the conciliar fathers had in view provincial and plenary council. But from 1965, after the council on, worldwide, there has been only 5 provincial council and 9 plenary council. The most recent celebrated was in Australia. So the council promote this, but in the time after the council, it is as if it is not relevant. There has been many diocesan councils or synods celebrated, or maybe more important, new assemblies, diocesan assemblies, regional, for instance, in Brazil, for part of the Brazil, or national church assemblies. What about now? And what we know when we think about the governance of the Catholic Church is the bishops' conferences, established first in Belgium, the first one, before the council, but it is mandatory after the council. And even if this level, national, even if the motu proprio apostolos suos restricted the mandatum docendi of the conferences. So now, today, we are thinking about the continental level. In the first centuries of the church, particularly the second and the third, and even before the ecumenical council in the 4th century, there has been regional or so-called continental gathering of bishops of various churches. For instance, in Asia, in Africa, and so on. And the Canon 5 of the Nicaea Council referred to that. So it was, I would say, traditional at that time to gather bishops of churches of a large region or of a continent. And it is amazing to see that the synodal or conciliar life of the church was first expressed at the regional level rather than universal. The paradigm of the first century, of the first millennium, was regional collaboration between churches rather than the paradigm of the second millennium, which is a universalist paradigm. When we think of the church, we think about universal church, which was not the case in the first millennium. At the council, the Second Vatican Council, there are already insights about something larger than the national level. For instance, Christus Dominus, number 38, and I quote, communications between episcopal conferences, the plural, not only the Canadian, but communication between episcopal conferences. It means maybe France, Belgium, Spain, German, and so on. Communications between episcopal conferences of different nations should be especially encouraged in order to promote and safeguard the common good. So there is there an insight in the roots to think about regional or continental level. Same thing in Ad Gentes, the decree on the missions, the missionary activity of the church, Ad Gentes 22. And so, I quote, it is to be hoped that episcopal conferences, again the plural, within the limits of each major social cultural territory, and this is important, to think about the world and to think about the worldwide church in terms of there is in the church major social cultural territory. For instance, Asia, Middle East, Latin America, Africa. So it is to be hoped that episcopal conferences within the limits of each major social cultural territory will so coordinate their efforts that they may be able to pursue the proposal of adaptation. So here, the concept of major social cultural territory and the goal of this coordination to adapt the life of the church according to the culture. On this basis, the motu proprio after the council, Paul VI, in the motu proprio ecclesiologist for the adaptation of the life of the church. So number 4 spoke about episcopal conferences of several countries or international conferences can be established. So we have this insight that not only we can have an episcopal conferences, Nicola, someone is trying to enter and is writing to me, José Salz.
Maybe he will connect again. So I will add him. I will write to him directly.
Okay, good.
Continue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Paul VI was already thinking of episcopal conferences of several countries or international conferences. And number 5, the relationships between episcopal conferences. For instance, between the conferences of Togo and of Ivory Coast and so on. Especially those of neighboring countries can be maintained in opportune and suitable ways through the secretariat of these conferences. and number 6, A, B, C, D, communicating the principal methods of actions in pastoral matters and activities, forwarding writings and papers with which set forth the decision of the conference, sending information about various undertaking of apostolate, and so on. So we can see it is a gradual process, the consciousness of the importance of continental level. And Paul VI himself encouraged the creation of different churches groupings. For instance, when he went to Manila in 70, he encouraged the creation of the FIUC, the Federation of Asian Bishops' Conferences. So it is a grouping on a continental basis. In 69, when he went to Uganda in a famous speech, he encouraged the creation of the SHEAM, the Symposium of Bishops' Conferences of Africa and Madagascar. And similarly, in 71 for the CCEE for Europe. So Paul VI moved forward and established the basis of, I would say, the fruit we now have in this continental gatherings. But note that at that time it was only a grouping of churches through their bishops. It was meetings of bishops only. Pope John Paul II, he promotes the continental level by convoking special assemblies of the Synod of Bishops. For instance, in 96 for Asia, 97 for America, 98 Oceania, 99 and 2004 for Europe. Again, Africa in 94 and 2009, and Middle East in 2010. So it was his way to encourage groupings of churches through their own bishops. And if you have observed Pope Francis in his first apostolic exhortation, Evangelii Gaudium, quote the documents of regional assemblies of bishops, particularly the CELAM and for Europe. Same thing in Laudato Si. He quoted the FIUC and the CELAM. And same thing in Amoris Laetitia. So it is in a way a new reality, but we can see the origin and the development of this. And what it is important is the scope and the goal of these groupings and communications between episcopal conferences. It is for inculturate or to adapt the life of the church to a particular culture, a major social cultural region. What is new? So you know that before the council, the CELAM existed already from 1955. It is probably the first experiment of such a grouping of churches on a continental basis. So now what we have and what is the difference between what we had already on the pontificate of Paul VI and John Paul II? Episcopalis communio, when it speaks about the continental level, it is not only meetings of bishops solely or only bishops. It is assembly involving the whole people of God. So it is the difference. It is not anymore meeting of bishops, but including lay people, priests, religious, and bishops. And so it is different from the bishop synod or from these institutions as CCEE, FEBC, SHEAM, and so far. Now, after the diocesan stage of the synodal process, we have a synthesis of what was discussed in this first stage. Enlarge your tent, the space of your tent, quoting Isaiah. So probably that you know this document. And from this fall, probably for most of you, January, already in December, January, February, we had on each continent, for instance, in North America, we had 12 Zoom meetings involving 5 representatives of every diocese in Canada and US. And now, next week, there will be the final assembly to write the document from North America. The meeting will be in Orlando, Florida, involving roughly 30 persons, bishops, priests, lay people, religious. The Assembly of Oceania and Europe is already, so it opened last Sunday, I think. So it is on the way. And we will get synthesis from all the continents, Latin America, North Africa, Oceania, Europe, Asia, maybe Middle East, I'm not sure. And from this, we will get probably, so it will be finalized, the continental stage by the end of March. Probably that in June, we will get the instrumentum laboris for the universal meeting next October in Rome. And again, involving not only bishops, but involving also lay people for the process of discernment and decision making. So about this continental stage, I gave some information, particularly the way we move to this. It is a novelty, but when we look to that, the roots are already in the Ceylon in 55 and in the Second Vatican Council, the work of Paul VI, particularly, and John Paul II. But what it is important to know is the goal of that, because in a worldwide church, we could probably not decide always at the universal level. We must take into account the cultural differences. And as it is the case for the Oriental churches, probably that in the future, we can imagine that in the Catholic Church and living and being in communion, there can be some liturgical particularities or specificities, theological, canonical, and so on. So I think that it is not so now, but we can imagine that we are going to this point.